This video will look at how to manage your freight rules. So firstly we go to Merchant and then eMetrics, and then from the Freight drop down we click on Freight List. So we often get questions about what the difference between freight structures and freight rules are. Freight structures will help you define which products in the system should incur a freight charge, whereas the freight rules will determine what that charge should actually be. So once you've set up some freight structures, the next step is to create your freight rules. So from this page we can search the existing freight rules with a number of different filters here. We have a keyword search, a supplier, a specific postcode, a shipping weight, a price, a date range, and we can also choose to include inactive freight rules. So in our results here we can see there's a number of different rules already in the system, and we can edit the existing rules by clicking the green tick icon or deleting them by clicking the red cross. To create a new freight rule we click Create on the right hand side. So the first field we need to populate is the display name. So we do recommend that you give some consideration to the naming conventions you wish to use, because as the list of freight rules grows in your system, it'll be a lot easier to manage these with some consistency with the naming. We then select a supplier. So the reason why we're selecting a supplier here is because our system supports sending purchase orders directly to the supplier in the event that they can then drop ship the order. So if a customer has populated their shopping basket with 3 products from 3 different suppliers, then it's highly likely you will be charged freight from each of those companies, and this gives you the ability to hand that cost over to the customer. We then have a priority field. Now this can sometimes be confusing for customers. In the event that they have multiple freight rules applicable, they assume that the priority means whichever freight rule has the highest priority will take precedence, meaning you can always enforce the more expensive freight rule to take precedence. The system, however, will always attempt to give the customer the cheapest freight rule, and when the priority really takes effect is if there's 2 freight rules that have the same price. This allows you to give one of them a preference. So an example where this might be relevant is if you have 2 different freight rules using 2 different couriers, we could then give one of those couriers the preference. So we can then select a specific courier, and then we move into the charges. So for each freight rule we can have a base charge, for example $10, and we can say how much of an allowance that rule has. So if we were to type in 5 here, it means the base charge of $10 will be applicable for the first 5 kilos of weight. For any kilo over that, we can then state how much it will cost. We then move into the restrictions, and we can set a postcode range, meaning you can define different prices for different areas in Australia. We can set a weight limit that this is applicable for. So for example, you may wish to have a certain freight rule for the first 10 kilos with a base charge of $10, and then you may set up a separate freight rule for everything over the 10 kilos at a much higher base rate charge. We can set date ranges, and we can also set an order total range. Now the other thing worth mentioning here is with the freight rules you can actually give the customer the option of different couriers based on price. So if we were to complete this rule now with one courier selected, we could then go through and create a second rule with a completely different price and a different courier attached to it. Because the courier is attached to it, the freight rules will show up in the checkout as options for the customer. So when they go to the checkout page, they'll see the option of the 2 couriers with the description of each courier. For example, Australia Post Express, 1 business day with a price, and then they'll see the next one, so Australia Post Standard, 2 to 4 business days at a different price. Once you're happy with the settings, you just click Save to create the rule.